At the FICCI AGM today, we are joined by Dr. Pawan Goenka. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Before we come to the FICCI AGM, sir, the bigger and the more prouder news for us is how how India is now having its own space programs individually without any political interference or whatever. I want you to take your reaction on how do you feel, moving from an automotive industry to a space program and eventually leading it, and now we are having global players coming to India. Give us a general scenario, sir.
Well, let me say on a personal front, I was very surprised when I was asked to come into this role, and something new for me. But once I got into it, I feel so good that I'm able to get into a sector that is, in a way, even though it's 60 years old, but it's a sunrise sector, latest sunrise sector, where the commercial activity, the economic activity, is coming into sort of focus in the last 2-3 years. So this sector that has tremendous opportunity on three fronts. The first is what we do on the scientific missions, and that, of course, the whole of India is so proud of in what we have done Chandrayaan-3 and the plans that we have for the future that have already been announced. The second is how it can contribute to the economic activity of the country, and that's the new area, and that's where my organization in space will focus on. And we have a fairly aspirational goal of where we take the space economy from where we are today to where we would be 10 years from now. And the third is what space can do to better the life of our citizens, right? And we don't realize often that from the time that we wake up to the time we go to sleep, and even when we're sleeping, space is affecting our life in every which way. Communication, disaster management, if you look at cyclones and all, the damage it causes now is much less than what it was 20 years ago because of the space giving all the advanced information. So how the space activity can help better the life of people. So all the three fronts are so exciting and so much opportunity that I'm glad personally that I have an opportunity to be in this sector and make a small contribution.
Sir, also, if I could tell you about, your organization is doing wonders when it comes to, enemies are great leaders, though everybody knows that. But, give us 2-3 areas where you are working currently. The knowledge is in public domain, but for the benefit of our viewers, sir, what is the company doing currently to, make the lives of the normal consumers or Indians or globally much more easier and much more reliant and much more safer to say so?
I don't know what you mean by company because in space is not a company.
In space, in the sense of what you are leading into,
Okay, sure,
that
sure,
3 areas.
sure. So see, there are many things that we're focusing on. Space is at least 4 or 5 different verticals that one looks at. The biggest focus for us is how do we develop applications and how do the startups come in and develop applications. That means you take the data that is coming from space with the satellites that have been launched by ISRO so far, in future could be launched by private sector, take that data and convert that data to useful information, which will then help us in our day-to-day life. So it affects agriculture, it affects climate control, it affects urban planning, it affects disaster management, it affects fisheries, affects mining, affects communication, affects navigation, all of these things, right? So that's a big focus, and that's where the big sort of economic and social benefit is. So that's one focus. And second, when we talk, this is what we call downstream. When we talk upstream, meaning launch vehicles, satellites, which has all been done by ISRO so far, and now private sector is coming into that and slowly building their own capability to have their own launch vehicles independent of ISRO and to launch satellites that the private sector will own. So as we move forward, we would see that in the space economy, private sector will play a bigger and bigger role. Just like what has already happened in USA, what's already happened in Europe. India has a late start, so we'll have to do some catch up. But pretty soon, I think private sector will become very significant in the contribution it makes to space.
So you have been speaking with the government stakeholders when it comes to private, private players stepping into the space sector. India initial years has been kind of restricted for private players to come in. With this regime, we've seen openness to have the private sector over. But in what all sectors do you think the private sector can play a role without potentially causing any harm to India's safety or its safety interests?
You see, the Honorable Prime Minister, way back as soon as he came to power in 2014, became Prime Minister in 2014, I think he set his eyes on space. He perhaps had an exposure to space even in his days of Chief Minister of Gujarat through Space Application Center that is in Ahmedabad. and he started looking at how space can transform. Right? And then finally in 2020, the announcement was made about opening up the space to private sector, and then space policy came in, space was created, all of these things. Now the big thing is FDI policy changing also, so all that is happening. Now your question is, where does private sector make contribution without compromising with safety and security? So in a way, it's one of the roles of in space to ensure that whatever private sector does is done without any compromise to safety and security. So every activity of private sector has to be authorized by us. Okay, so we are a regulator of space. So every activity of private sector has to be authorized by us. And in authorization, we are looking at the technical readiness of whatever they're doing and security of the country, that it does not compromise. So we will look at who are the people, what is their track record, what kind of thing they're doing, how can it potentially be misused, and what guards can we put so that misuse cannot happen. And if they cannot put guards, we will say, sorry, you cannot do it. Okay, so that's the role that we have to ensure that we don't compromise, because obviously when space going away from hands of just the government through ISRO to the whole country, then there is a risk that some compromise can happen, and we have to ensure that doesn't
But one
happen.
of the areas I wanted to ask you is where private sector can potentially come in and eventually, do the catching up that's much needed in comparison to US and Europe.
So see, I don't expect private sector in India, at least in the midterm, to play a big role in scientific missions and in interplanetary missions. Okay, I think they'll be sort of constraining themselves to communication. Okay, and right now all communication satellites that India has are either ISRO owned or foreign owned. There are no private sector owned satellites in India. So India will probably, the private sector will get into communication, and communication satellite requirement will probably grow 10x between now and 10 years from now. Okay, so there will be big role to play. That's one, is to put the infrastructure in, and second is then to use the infrastructure to provide services. Navigation is an area which has not yet been fully leveraged in India in terms of space data being used from Indian navigation system, which is NAVIC. Okay, so now we are overhauling the NAVIC system by launching more satellites, by creating a L1 band, which didn't exist earlier, and therefore none of the mobiles could use our data, NAVIC data, because L1 band, because they are designed for L1 band. So that's now happened in one satellite and will happen in all the future satellites. Right? So then how do we use NAVIC data for the navigational system that are being developed in India? That will be where private sector will come in a big way. Launches, not the large launches, but the small launches, 100 kg, 200 kg, 300 kg satellites, small launches, where already we have two startups that are in advanced stage of being ready for those launches, and more will come. And then, of course, to sort of do applications, as I talked about, there are many areas where application can be done using data already available. And then we're also working on how do we fill the data gap in what is needed and what we have, and what kind of satellites need to be launched, and can those be launched by the private sector, not by ISRO. So all of these activities.
And so, last question: FDI in space will be a big thing. How do you think that would open up the Indian space economy?
Well, the primary, the two ways FDI will help the space economy. One is the funding to the startups, right? And obviously, as I said, there are 200 startups in the space sector, and they require funding. And right now, there are constraints on getting funding, and sometimes they have to go and open an offshore sort of company to get funding. All that will go away with the new FDI policy, and they can easily get funding from outside. That's one. Second is that there are many global companies that want to do business in India in space, and currently they are constrained. Okay, so with the new FDI policy, they'll be able to make investments and have their own infrastructure, own facilities on the ground to do business in India, whether it is in satellite making, whether it is in launching, whether it is whatever area it might be. So the FDI policy will have different sort of limits for different activities in space, and it will be announced soon.
Dr. Goenka, I cannot let you go without asking you a question on automobile sector in India. Record number of sales in the festive season. So semiconductor shortage finally settling in. What's your outlook on the automotive sector, sir? How bullish are you now?
So let me just say that at the time of COVID, there was such a gloom and doom, and everybody was saying the industry will never come back to the current level for the next 6 or 7 years. Industry has surprised everybody, right? Not me. I thought that the industry will bounce back very quickly, and I'm so happy to see. Though I don't have any active involvement with industry anymore, but I'm so happy to see that industry is really going top gun, and it has happened because of the products that have been launched. And the pricing that the product has, the aspiration that our people have. So there was a lot of hue and cry at some point that BS6 norms will kill the industry, all the safety norms will increase the cost. None of that. Customers understand that you have to pay for environment, you have to pay for safety, and they're willingly spending money to buy vehicles with the latest safety equipment and environment. So I'm very happy to see what I see. What I would like to see more of, okay, is electric vehicle penetration in passenger vehicle.
Okay.
I'm very happy with the way three-wheelers are going, happy with the way two-wheelers are going, happy with the way buses are going. But passenger vehicles are very slow. Many companies have announced sort of aggressive plans for it. Let's see how it plays out. And right now, the level of less than 2% penetration is not right.
Plus, also, RBI has decided to hold rates, sir. Do you think it's finally good news for people who want to buy vehicles and home loans? Holding rates is good for now, sir?
I don't think anybody would be surprised by that. Nobody expected rates to go up, and very few people perhaps expected, if at all, rates to go up or down. So nobody should be surprised with that. And yeah, I think it will be good, because any fear that one might have had that will rates go up is at least gone.
All right. Well, that was Dr. Pawan Goenka, candid as always, and I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Yeah. Candid as always, Dr. Pawan Goenka, talking about how the space program will pan out in India and how the automotive space in India is set on a roll.